The air in the docking bay of Ethel Neon smelled like ozone and expensive coolant, a sharp contrast to the stagnant, rust-caked atmosphere of the fringe colonies I'd spent the last 15 years rotting in. My mechanical left arm gave a rhythmic hum, a low-frequency vibration that rattled the bone of my shoulder. It was an old model, a scrapyard special I'd bolted on after the Great Desync stripped me of my official rank and my biological limb. I stepped off the transport shuttle, my heavy tactical boots striking the translucent floor with a dull thud. Every step felt like an intrusion on this world of light and glass. The port officials, beings with skin that shimmered like polished amethyst, looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. To them, I was a half-man, a clanking relic of a Terran age that should have been forgotten. "Kalen Vane?" a voice asked, smooth as silk and cold as a vacuum. I turned. A robotic drone, shaped like a silver dragonfly, hovered at my eye level. Its optic sensor pulsed with a pale blue light. "Just Vax," I said, my voice grating like gravel in a blender. "Keep the formalities for someone who still has a soul to lose." "The Duchess awaits you in the inner sanctum, Commander Vax," the drone persisted. "I'm no commander," I replied, adjusting the collar of my worn leather duster. "I'm a contractor. I heard there was a leak in the plumbing, or an assassination that needed doing. Why else would the High Court call back a ghost?" I followed the drone through the winding corridors of the celestial capital. Ethel Neon hadn't changed much, but I had. 15 years ago, I walked these halls in the gleaming white and gold armor of the Aegis Guard. Back then, I was the youngest Terran ever to be sworn in as a protector of the Crystallis bloodline. Back then, I believed in things like honor and duty. Now, I only believed in credits and the next maintenance cycle for my arm. As we moved deeper into the palace, the architecture began to breathe. The walls were made of living silicon, pulsing with a faint violet bioluminescence that synced with the collective heartbeat of the city. Images flashed in my mind, unbidden. The smell of burning circuits, the scream of a young girl, the blinding white light of a collapsing reactor. I shook my head, trying to clear the static. I was 45 years old and my memories were starting to fray at the edges like an old data slug. I'd saved her, the little Duchess Solami, when the world was ending. I'd shoved her into the cryopod and taken the full brunt of the energy discharge. I remembered the sensation of my skin peeling away, the white-hot agony as my arm disintegrated into ash. I'd been a hero for exactly 10 minutes. Then the politics started. They blamed me for the reactor failure. Said a Terran shouldn't have been in the control room. They stripped me of my medals, gave me a one-way ticket to the rim, and told me never to look back. "Check your six, Vax," I muttered to myself, a habit from the trenches. The drone led me to a massive set of obsidian doors. They didn't open. They dissolved, the molecules rearranging themselves to create a passage. Beyond them lay the High Council chamber, a circular room that overlooked the neon-lit canyons of the city below. The air inside was thick with tension. Dozens of Crystallis nobles sat in elevated pews, their skin glowing with various shades of amber and violet, indicating their agitation. At the center of it all, on a throne carved from a single massive diamond, sat an old man I recognized too well. King Vorus. His skin was a dull, dusty gray now, the light of his life force fading. But he wasn't the one who caught my breath. Standing beside the throne was a woman who looked like she had been sculpted from starlight and midnight. Her skin was a translucent violet, revealing a delicate lattice of fiber-optic nerves that pulsed with a steady, rhythmic glow. Her hair was a waterfall of shimmering, crystalline strands that reached her waist. She wore a gown of liquid metal that flowed around her like a living thing. She was no longer the frightened 10-year-old girl I'd pushed into a pod. She was the most powerful being in the system. "You're late, Vane," the king rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. I didn't look at him. I couldn't take my eyes off her. Her violet eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, I felt a ghost of a sensation in my missing limb, a phantom itch of warmth. "Traffic was a bitch on the Riftway," I said, leaning back on my heels, intentionally being disrespectful. "So what's the job? You need a head on a platter? Or are we just here to admire the scenery?" A murmur of outrage rippled through the council. One noble, a tall being with sharp crystalline horns, stood up. How dare this scrap heap speak to the king in such a manner? Guards, remove him! Two Aegis guards wearing the same armor I once wore stepped forward. Their energy pikes hummed with lethal intent. Belay that order, a voice rang out. It wasn't the king. It was Solomie. The guards froze. The entire room went dead silent. Solomie stepped down from the dais, her movements fluid and predatory, like a panther made of glass. She walked straight up to me, stopping only a few inches away. Up close, she smelled like mountain air after a lightning storm. "Do you recognize me, Kalen?" she whispered. I didn't blink. I recognize a duchess who's grown too tall for her own good. Last time I saw you, you were crying over a broken doll. She smiled, and the glow beneath her skin flared into a brilliant, blinding violet. I haven't cried in 15 years, not since the day you taught me what it means to be brave. She turned to the council, her voice projecting with a power that shook the very air. Father, oracles of the High Court, we have discussed the need for a stabilizing force for the upcoming transition. We have spoken of the need for a guardian who cannot be corrupted by our internal politics. King Vorus narrowed his eyes. Yes, daughter, but what does this Terran mercenary have to do with— I have made my choice, Solomie interrupted, her eyes never leaving mine. In accordance with the ancient protocols of the First Light, I hereby declare Kalen Vax as my consort partner and the co-processor of the Ethel Neon Core. The reaction was instantaneous. It wasn't just a murmur, it was a roar of disbelief. High-ranking officials were on their feet, their skin flashing angry reds and oranges. The king's grip on his throne tightened so hard the diamond cracked. This is madness, the Horned Noble shouted. A Terran, a cyborg, he is a subspecies, a relic. I stood there, my mind spinning. Consort? Co-processor? That wasn't just a marriage. In Crystallis culture, a co-processor was a biological and neural union. It meant merging our nervous systems. It meant sharing every thought, every memory, every pulse of blood. It meant I would never be alone again. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered, the words barely escaping my lips. Solomie reached out. Her hand, cool and smooth, touched the scarred skin of my cheek. I don't make jokes about destiny, Kalen. You saved my life once. Now I'm going to give you yours back. The king stood up, his gray skin darkening to a stormy charcoal. We will discuss this in private, Solomie. This declaration is not official until the Oracle confirms the compatibility. The Oracle has already spoken, she replied calmly, her gaze burning into mine. The compatibility is 100%. It has been since the day our blood first mixed on the floor of the reactor room. I looked at her, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt a genuine flicker of fear. This wasn't a job. This was a trap, a beautiful, glowing, violet trap. I'm not the man you remember, Princess, I said, my voice low so only she could hear. There's more metal in me than meat. I'm hollowed out. Foobar. Then let me fill the gaps, she whispered back. The guard stepped back, but the atmosphere in the room remained explosive. I knew how this worked. I'd been a soldier long enough to know that a declaration like this was a death sentence. Half the people in this room wanted Solomie's throne, and the other half wanted my head for even being in the same zip code as it. As Solomie led me out of the chamber, her hand firmly entwined with mine, I looked back at the king. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked terrified. I had come back to Ethel Neon for a paycheck, but as the obsidian doors closed behind us, I realized I'd just walked into the opening moves of a galactic war, and I was the most important piece on the board. Time to bug out, I thought to myself. No, too late for that. The neural shunts are already humming. Solomie didn't lead me to a prison cell, though it felt like one. We walked through a private transit tube that bypassed the main palace levels, spiraling upward toward the apex, the highest point of the city where the atmosphere was thin and the stars felt close enough to touch. You have a lot of nerve, I said, finally pulling my hand away once we were inside the private elevator. You just painted a bullseye on my chest the size of a supernova. Do you have any idea what your people are going to do to a Terran who steps into a royal bed? Solomie leaned against the translucent wall of the elevator, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon. They will try to kill you, of course, probably before the sun sets on the dark side. And that's your plan? Use me as a meat shield again? She turned to me, and the playful glint in her eyes vanished. I'm not a child anymore, Kalen. I don't need a shield. I need a partner. The hegemony is fractured. My father is dying, and his advisors are vultures waiting for the corpse to go cold. They want to sell the source code to the void drifters. If that happens, this entire system goes dark, permanently. And what does a washed-up merc have to do with source code? I growled. My arm was acting up, the servos grinding. I needed a shot of hydraulic fluid and a stiff drink, in that order. When you saved me 15 years ago, you didn't just push me into a pod, she said, stepping closer. The elevator slowed as it reached the apex. The energy surged from the reactor. It used your body as a conduit to transfer the encryption keys into my neural lattice. You are the hardware to my software. Without you, I can only access 10% of the planetary defense grid. With you, I'm the key, I finished, the realization hitting me like a freight train. This isn't about romance, it's about a goddamn password. She flinched. The glow beneath her skin dimmed for a fraction of a second, a sign of genuine hurt. It is about the survival of our species. But for me, it has always been about the man who didn't hesitate to give his life for a girl he didn't even know. The elevator doors hissed open. We stepped out into a garden that defied the laws of physics. Trees made of liquid silver grew from floating islands of rock, their leaves humming with a low-frequency song. In the center of the garden was a small circular table with 2 chairs. Sit, she commanded. You look like you're about to fall apart. I've been about to fall apart for a decade, I said, but I sat anyway. A robotic server, far more advanced than the Dragonfly drone, drifted over and placed a glass of amber liquid in front of me. I sniffed it. High-grade Terran whiskey. Expensive as a small moon. Where did you get this? I asked, taking a sip. It burned perfectly. I've been tracking your supply runs to the outposts, she said, sitting opposite me. You have a preference for the 20-year-old malt from the New Scottish colonies. I made sure to keep a few crates on ice. I stared at her. You've been stalking me? I've been protecting my investment, she countered, though her smile was softer now. Do you know how many times I had to discreetly pay off a bounty hunter who got too close to your trail? Or how many times I jammed the sensors of a pirate ship about to intercept your transport? I put the glass down. I thought I was just lucky. Luck doesn't exist in a universe governed by probability and code, Kalen. Only preparation. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the humming of the silver trees. I looked out over the city. From up here, Ethel Neon looked like a circuit board made of jewels. Millions of lives all connected to the central core. And I was the one holding the switch. Why the marriage stunt? I asked. You could have just told me about the keys. I would have helped. For the right price. Because a consort has legal immunity, she explained. As my partner, you have access to the inner core without being questioned by the council, and more importantly, she paused, her violet eyes searching mine. I wanted to see if the man was still there, or if the machine had finally won. The machine's winning, Solomie, I said, tapping my metallic forearm. Every year I replace another bit of myself. A lung here, a kidney there. Radiation from the fringe isn't kind to Terran meat. In another 5 years, I'll just be a bucket of bolts with a bad attitude. The flesh is a vessel, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's the signal that matters. Your signal is unique. It's messy, chaotic, and incredibly stubborn. It's exactly what the core needs to stay stable. Suddenly, the garden's bioluminescence turned a sharp strobe-like blue. Alert! A calm, synthetic voice announced over the garden speakers. Incursion detected in Sector 4. Security perimeter breached. I was on my feet before the voice finished the sentence. My mechanical arm whirred as I drew my sidearm, a heavy-duty kinetic blaster that had seen me through 100 skirmishes. Stay behind me, I snapped, my old instincts taking over. Kalen, wait! A shadow detached itself from the silver trees. It wasn't a person. It was a ghost bot, a stealth-rigged assassin drone used by the radical fringe groups. It was thin, spindly, and draped in a light-bending cloak that made it look like a ripple in the air. It raised an arm, a plasma cutter glowing at the tip. I didn't think. I dove forward, my bionic arm absorbing the impact as I tackled the air where the ripple was. We hit the ground hard. The drone was cold and slick, vibrating with high-frequency energy. "Vax, down!" Solomie cried out. I rolled to the side just as a blast of violet energy erupted from Solomie's outstretched hand. She didn't use a weapon. She was the weapon. The energy hit the drone square in its optical sensor, causing it to screech in a digital frequency that made my teeth ache. The drone staggered, its cloak flickering. I didn't give it a second chance. I leveled my blaster and put 3 rounds of armor-piercing kinetic slugs into its core. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks and blue fluid. I stood up, breathing hard. My arm was sparking, a small cut on my real cheek dripping blood onto my collar. "You okay?" I asked, scanning the perimeter. Solomie was standing there, her skin glowing so brightly it was hard to look at her. Her hands were trembling, but her face was set in a mask of cold fury. "They dared to strike here," she whispered. "In the apex. My own people." "Not your people," I said, holstering my weapon. "Vultures. I told you, you put a target on us." I walked over to the wreckage of the drone, kicking a piece of its chassis. "This is a high-end model, not something a street gang can afford. This came from the inside. Your High Council is leaking like a rusted hull." Solomie walked over to me, her light fading back to a manageable level. She reached out and touched the cut on my cheek. Her fingers were warm now, a strange, electric heat that seemed to jumpstart my own sluggish heart. "You're bleeding," she said softly. "I've had worse," I replied, though I didn't move away. "Listen, if we're going to do this, if I'm really this co-processor thing, we need to move. They know where we are. This was just a scout." She nodded. "You're right. We need to initiate the link tonight, before the council can vote to strip me of my authority." "The link?" I asked, a sense of dread pulling in my stomach. "Now? It's the only way to activate the full defense grid, Kalen. It's the only way to keep you safe. Once we are linked, your nervous system is backed up by the planetary core. You become more than human." I looked at her, at the shimmering beauty of this alien world, and then down at my scarred metallic hands. I was a man of the dirt, of the grime and the grease. I didn't belong in the stars. But as I looked into Solomie's violet eyes, I saw the little girl who had clutched my hand while the world burned. And I knew I couldn't walk away. Not again. "Fine," I said, giving her a grim smile. "But if I start seeing your childhood memories of embarrassing birthday parties, the deal is off." She laughed, a sound like glass bells. "I promise to keep the embarrassing files encrypted. For now." "Let's move," I said, checking the power cell on my blaster. "We've got a long night ahead of us, and I've got a feeling this is just the opening act." As we headed back toward the lift, I noticed the city below was changing. The steady violet glow was being replaced by a flickering, agitated orange. The news of the declaration was spreading. The shock was over. Now the resistance was beginning. I took one last look at the stars. They looked colder than usual. 20 years of service, I muttered to the empty air, and I end up as a glorified battery for a neon princess, FUBAR. Absolutely FUBAR. But as Solomie's hand found mine again, her light pulsing in time with my heart, I realized I'd never felt more alive. The ghost was back in the machine, and he was ready for a fight. The descent into the inner sanctum was not a physical movement so much as it was a transition of states. We moved through a series of gravity wells that made my stomach do somersaults and my cybernetic ear pop with a sharp metallic ring. Solomie held my hand the entire time. Her skin was cool, but I could feel the electricity thrumming just beneath the surface. A rhythmic pulse that matched the distant, low-frequency hum of the planetary core. "You need to stay frosty, Kalen," I told myself. "This isn't a battlefield. It's worse. It's a laboratory." The sanctum was a cathedral of light and logic. Walls of translucent obsidian stretched upward into a darkness that seemed to swallow the very concept of a ceiling. Suspended in the center of the room was the source, a rotating sphere of liquid light that served as the brain of ethyl neon. It didn't just look like tech, it looked like a trapped star, beautiful and terrifying in its raw potential. Around the sphere, a dozen technicians, beings of pure light form, whose physical shells had mostly been replaced by shimmering energy, floated in a meditative state. Their skin flickered with data bursts, a constant stream of information that kept the city breathing. "We are ready," Solomie whispered, her voice echoing in the vast space. I looked at the chairs in the center of the platform. They weren't chairs so much as they were neural cradles, designed to interface directly with the spine. A cluster of silver needles, thinner than human hair, weighted like a nest of metallic spiders. "I've seen this before," I said, my voice sounding hollow. "During the Great Desync, they tried to link a whole squad of us to the defense grid. Most of the boys didn't make it. Their brains just fried, turned into meat slurry within 5 minutes. "That was a crude military application, Kalen," Solomie replied, stepping toward the cradle. "They tried to force a connection. This is a symphony. We aren't hacking the system. We are becoming the system." I felt the old fear clawing at my chest. It was the same fear I felt 15 years ago, standing in the middle of that collapsing reactor room. People think soldiers are fearless. They're wrong. We're just better at hiding it behind a 1,000-yard stare and a stiff jaw. The truth is, I was terrified of losing the small piece of myself that was still Kalen Vane. If I merged with this alien god mind, would there be anything left of the man who liked old whiskey and bad jokes? The head technician, a being named Xylos, whose skin was a deep, bruised purple, drifted toward me. His eyes were nothing more than swirling galaxies of data. "Commander Vane, the synchronization requires a high degree of transparency. Any mental shielding or repressed trauma will cause a feedback loop. You must let the barriers down." "Easier said than done, pal," I muttered, sitting down in the cold cradle. "I've spent the last 15 years building those barriers. They're the only thing keeping the static out." Solomie sat in the cradle opposite me. As the needles began to extend, seeking the ports at the base of my skull, she reached out one last time. "Kalen, look at me." I met her violet gaze. "Don't fight the tide," she said. "Just swim with it." The first needle hit the jack in my neck with a sharp electric sting. My vision whited out. For a second, I was back in the reactor room. It was 15 years ago. The air was a thick soup of radioactive ash and ozone. The alarms were screaming, a high-pitched wail that seemed to vibrate in my marrow. I was 28 years old, a prime specimen of Terran military engineering, and I was about to die. I saw the little girl, Solomie, huddled under a terminal. Her skin was barely glowing, a sign of her extreme terror. The reactor core was pulsing with an unstable white light, a miniature sun on the verge of birth. I knew what I had to do. My training said to secure the VIP and bug out, but the exit was blocked by a wall of fire. I grabbed her. She was so small, so fragile. I felt the heat of the core behind me, a physical weight that pressed against my back. I shoved her into the emergency cryopod, the only shielded container in the room. "Wait!" she had screamed, her tiny hands clawing at the glass. I didn't wait. I hit the seal. And then the core blew. In the present, a massive surge of data flooded my mind. It wasn't like reading a book. It was like being hit by a tidal wave of every emotion, memory, and thought Solomie had ever had. I saw myself through her eyes, a giant in white armor, a protector, a man who became a legend in her lonely childhood. I felt her grief when I was exiled, her anger at her father, and her unwavering belief that I was the only one who could save Ethel Neon. The neural harmonics began to stabilize. A golden equation formed in the void of my mind, representing our synchronization. Psi-sync equals integral from 0 to t of phi vax of t times phi sola of tdt plus delta core. The variables represented our distinct consciousnesses merging into a single, unified signal. It was beautiful, and it was agonizing. "Kalen!" I heard her voice, not through my ears, but inside my very soul. "You're holding back. The sector of your brain holding the reactor accident, it's locked. You have to open it." "I can't," I thought, the mental static rising. "If I open it, the pain comes back. The smell of my own burning flesh. The sound of my arm being torn away by the energy shear." "You aren't alone anymore," she whispered. "I'm here. Share the weight." I took a deep breath, a phantom movement in a world of data. I let go. The memory of the accident exploded. But this time, I wasn't alone in the fire. Solomie was there with me. She wrapped her glowing presence around that horrific moment, soothing the jagged edges of my trauma. I felt the sensation of the energy surge hitting me 15 years ago, but instead of the searing agony, there was a strange, harmonic resonance. The source code. It wasn't in a computer, it was in me. The energy from the reactor hadn't just destroyed my body, it had etched the encryption keys into my very DNA, encoded in the way my nerves had been cauterized and rebuilt by the cybernetics. I was the bridge. I was the living key to the kingdom. The synchronization hit 100%. Suddenly, I could see everything. I saw the entire city of Ethel Neon as if it were a part of my own body. I felt the heartbeat of the millions of citizens, the flow of power through the neon canyons, the silent rotation of the planetary shields. I saw the threats too, the dark spots in the grid where the radical factions were hiding, the silent countdowns in the shadows. Sola Me was there, a brilliant sun in the center of my consciousness. We were two hearts beating with a single rhythm. The link was complete. I opened my eyes in the physical world. I was drenched in sweat, my mechanical arm twitching with a newfound precision. Sola Me was looking at me, her skin shimmering with an intensity I'd never seen before. She looked like she was made of pure violet fire. "We did it," she breathed, her voice a mix of exhaustion and triumph. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely light. I didn't feel like a scraphead anymore. I felt integrated. "Check the sit rep," I said, my voice now carrying a strange melodic resonance. "We have an incursion. 6 targets moving through the ventilation shafts toward the inner sanctum. High-yield explosives detected." "You can see them?" Xylos asked, his galaxy's eyes wide with awe. "I can feel them," I said, drawing my blaster. It felt like a toy in my hand. "They're coming from the Obsidian Guard. Your father's own elite, Sola Me." She stood up, her jaw setting into that hard line of royalty. "Then let them come. They think they are fighting a human and a princess." She looked at me, her eyes glowing with a love that transcended species. "They're about to find out they're fighting the planet itself." I checked the power cell on my sidearm. It was overcharged, humming with the energy of the core. Oscar Mike, I thought. The war is here. "Stay close to me, Sola Me," I said, my professional mask slipping back on, though the connection between us was still humming like a live wire. "Things are about to get messy." "I'm counting on it, Commander," she replied, a mischievous glint returning to her violet eyes. The obsidian doors began to vibrate. The first wave of the coup had arrived, and for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't afraid of the fire. I was the fire. The explosion didn't happen where I expected it to. I thought they'd come through the doors like a traditional breach and clear squad. Instead, the floor of the inner sanctum groaned as 3 kilometers of crystal and steel were bypassed by a phase shift bomb. The ground beneath us simply ceased to exist for a split second. "Kalen!" Sola Me's voice was a sharp spike in my mind. I didn't need to look. Through the link, I felt her gravity well shift as she plummeted. I lunged, my mechanical arm extending with a speed that would have torn a human shoulder out of its socket. I caught her by the waist, my boots magnetizing to the remaining edge of the platform. We were dangling over a 300-meter drop into the cooling vats of the core. Below us, the liquid light surged, hungry and incandescent. "Hang on," I growled. My servos were screaming, the metal groaning under the weight of a royal in her liquid metal gown. The shadows moved. 5 figures in matte black armor drifted down from the ceiling on grav pucks. These weren't your average street thugs, or even the ghost bots we'd faced earlier. These were the Obsidian Guard, the King's personal silencers. They didn't carry blasters. They carried phase blades that could slice through a tank's hull like it was wet paper. "Drop her, Terran!" The leader's voice came through a distorted comms link. His skin, visible through a transparent visor, was a sickly mottled gray. It was General Vaxis, a man who had been a thorn in my side since I was a rookie guard. He'd always hated humans, said we were biological noise. "You've got a real bad habit of interrupting dinner, Vaxis," I said, my voice steady despite the 300 meters of death below my heels. "What's the matter? The king run out of treats to keep you on your leash?" "The king is a dying relic," Vaxis spat. "He's too weak to do what must be done. Ethyl neon belongs to the purebloods, not to a girl who plays with Terran garbage, and certainly not to a hybrid abomination. He raised his blade. I felt Solami's terror through our shared connection. It was cold, sharp, and overwhelming. She wasn't afraid for her life. She was afraid of what Vaxis represented, the end of her father's dream of unity. "Don't let go," she whispered in my mind. "Never," I replied. I didn't use my gun. With the link active, I had a backdoor into the Sanctum's environmental controls. I didn't need a bullet when I had the laws of physics on my side. I felt the pulse of the core below us. I reached out with my mind, seeking the gravity calibration subroutine. 0G in 3, 2, 1, I thought. Suddenly, the world went weightless. Vaxis and his men, who had been relying on their grav pucks for stability, were caught off guard as the local gravity field inverted. They drifted upward, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. I used the momentum to swing Solami back onto the remaining platform. We hit the ground, and I immediately deactivated the magnets in my boots. I kicked off the edge, flying through the air toward Vaxis. "I'm going to enjoy taking you apart," I said, my fist connecting with his helmet with the force of a small explosion. The kinetic energy sent him spiraling back into a silver tree, the metal shattering upon impact. The other 4 guards tried to stabilize, their phase blades humming as they carved through the air. Solami didn't just watch. She stood in the center of the platform, her skin glowing with a blinding, white-violet light. She raised her hands and the liquid light from the vats below began to rise, forming into spears of pure energy. "This is my world," she shouted, her voice amplified by the Sanctum's harmonics. "You are trespassers in the heart of ethyl neon." The energy spears launched. 2 of the guards didn't even have time to scream before they were vaporized, their armor turning to ash in a millisecond. The other 2 managed to parry the first few strikes, but Solami was relentless. She was channeling the raw power of the core, a feat that would have killed any other Crystallis noble. Through the link, I felt her strain. It was like trying to hold back a dam with your bare hands. Her neural pathways were heating up, the fiber optic lattice beneath her skin pulsing with a dangerous intensity. "Solami, stop!" I yelled, catching a phase blade on the reinforced casing of my cybernetic arm. The blade hissed, carving a deep groove into the metal. "It's too much. You'll burn out. I have to keep them." "Away from you," she gasped, her thoughts becoming fragmented, scattered like static. She was terrified, not of the guards, but of failing me. She saw me as her anchor, and the thought of losing that anchor again was more than she could bear. That's the thing about courage. It's not about being a badass with a gun. It's about being so scared you can't breathe, but doing the right thing anyway, because someone you love is counting on you. I saw the 5th guard, the one I'd missed, sneaking up behind her. He had a disruption grenade in his hand. If that went off near her while she was channeling the core, it would cause a total neural collapse. I didn't have time to aim. I threw my blaster. It hit the guard in the face, knocking him back, but the grenade was already in the air. I lunged. My biological heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, meaty sound that felt out of place in this world of light and silicon. I caught the grenade midair, the cold metal biting into my palm. 5 seconds. I looked at the gaping hole in the floor. "Kalen, no!" Solami's mental voice was a scream of pure agony. I gave her one last look, a look that held all the words I'd been too stubborn to say for 15 years. Then I jumped. I plummeted into the darkness, the wind whistling past my ears. I counted the seconds. 4, 3, 2. I threw the grenade into the center of the cooling vats. The explosion was muffled by the liquid light, a dull thump that sent a massive ripple of energy upward. The disruption field expanded, but because it was underwater, the lethal radiation was absorbed by the coolant. I hit the surface of the liquid light a second later. It wasn't like water. It was like falling into a cloud of electrified honey. My systems immediately began to fail. My mechanical arm shorted out, the servos locking in place. My cybernetic eye went dark. I felt the energy of the core trying to overwrite my brain, a million voices screaming in a language I couldn't understand. I was drowning in light. But then I felt a hand. Not a physical hand, but a presence. Sola me. She reached down into the depths of the core, her consciousness a golden thread that snagged on the jagged edges of my mind. "I've got you," she whispered. She pulled. I was dragged back up, breaking the surface of the liquid light with a gasp that felt like it was tearing my lungs apart. Sola-Mi was hovering above the vat, her gown tattered, her skin dim, but her eyes burning with a fierce protective light. She used a gravity tether to pull me back onto the platform. I collapsed onto the obsidian floor, my body smoking, my mechanical arm dead weight. Vaxas was gone. The remaining guards were either dead or had fled into the shadows. The sanctum was silent, save for the rhythmic humming of the source. Sola-Mi knelt beside me, her hands hovering over my chest. "You idiot," she said, tears of liquid light tracking down her violet cheeks. "You almost flatlined." I gave a ragged cough, the taste of ozone thick in my mouth. I had a handle on it. "Mostly." She laughed, a wet, shaky sound. "You are the most stubborn, arrogant, beautiful man I have ever known." I looked up at her, and the link flared one last time before settling into a low, comfortable simmer. I felt her relief, her love, and her bone-deep exhaustion. "We're a mess, Sola-Mi," I said, reaching up with my real hand to wipe a tear from her face. "A princess with a god complex and a merc who's half scrap." "Then we're the perfect pair to rule a dying world," she replied, leaning down to rest her forehead against mine. The doors at the top of the chamber burst open. This time it wasn't the obsidian guard. It was King Vorus, flanked by his royal physicians. The old man looked like he'd aged another 10 years in the last hour. He looked at the wreckage of his inner sanctum, at the dead guards, and then at his daughter cradling a battered Terran. "What has happened here?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Sola-Mi stood up, pulling me with her. I leaned on her, my dead arm hanging uselessly at my side. "The coup has failed, Father," she said, her voice echoing with the authority of the core itself. "Vaxas tried to kill us. He was working with the elders." Vorus slumped, the light in his skin turning a sickly translucent white. "I feared this. I feared the darkness would come from within." "It's already here," I said, looking the king in the eye. "And it's not going away just because you wish it would." Vaxas was just the tip of the spear. The conservative faction is going to burn this city down before they let a Terran and a deviant princess take the throne. "Then what do we do?" the king asked, looking at me as if I were a prophet instead of a discard. I looked at Sola-Mi. We were still linked, our thoughts intertwining. I saw the map of the city in my head, the tactical weaknesses, the logistics. I saw the hope she carried and the fear she was finally starting to conquer. "We don't wait for them to attack again," I said, my voice hardening into the tone of a commander. "We take the fight to them. We activate the global broadcast. We tell the people the truth about the source code. And then we show them what a unified ethel neon looks like." Sola-Mi squeezed my hand. Her pulse was steady now, strong. "Are you ready for another shock, Kalen?" she asked. I looked at my dead mechanical arm, then back at her. "I've survived a reactor explosion and a 300-meter drop into a star. I think I can handle a little publicity." We walked toward the exit, a broken soldier and a glowing queen, leaving the ashes of the old world behind us. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. But as we stepped into the neon light of the corridor, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the machines, not of the aliens, and not even of the man I was becoming. Courage isn't about the absence of fear, I thought, watching the violet light dance on Sola-Mi's skin. It's about finding something worth being afraid for. I checked my 6. The shadows were still there, but for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't running from them. I was waiting. "Let's go, Princess," I said. "We've got a planet to save." The transition from the inner sanctum to the broadcasting spire was a blur of violet light in the metallic tang of adrenaline. My dead mechanical arm was a heavy, cold reminder of the price of the previous hour. It hung at my side, a useless weight of chrome and carbon fiber, until Sola-Mi brushed her hand against the casing. I felt a spark through the link, a surge of rerouted power from her own internal lattice. The servos whined, groaned, and then snapped back to life, though the tactile feedback was glitchy, flickering like an old holovid. "Thanks," I muttered, flexing the silver fingers. "Thought I was going to have to do the rest of this one-handed." You are never one-handed as long as I am breathing, Kaelin, she replied. Her voice was steady, but I could feel the tremor in her thoughts. She was terrified of the next step, not the fighting, but the exposure. We stood on the observation deck of the apex spire, 3 kilometers above the glowing arteries of Ethel Neon. Below us, the city was a hive of agitated light. Thousands of crystalless citizens were pouring into the squares, their skin pulsing in rhythms of confusion and anger. The news of my return and Solome's declaration had spread through the data streams like a virus. Ready to play the hero, Commander? I asked, leaning against the railing. My real hand was shaking just as much as her thoughts were. This isn't about being a hero, Kaelin, she said, stepping to the center of the broadcast array. It's about being seen, truly seen. The array was a massive dish of resonant crystal designed to amplify a neural signal and broadcast it across the entire planetary grid. It didn't just send images or sound, it sent qualia, raw sensory experience. When we spoke, the people wouldn't just hear our words, they would feel our conviction, and they would feel the link. The head technician, Ilos, moved with a frantic energy. His purple skin was pale, almost translucent. High Duchess, the Council has already issued a countersignal. They are calling the commander a biological contaminant. If you do this, there is no going back. You are tying your soul to a Terran in front of 5 billion people. Initialize the sequence, Xylos, Solome commanded. But the resonance... Do it, I growled, stepping up beside her, before I change my mind and bug out to the nearest moon. I felt the needles of the spire's interface seek the ports in my neck again. This time, it wasn't just a local connection. It felt like my skull was being opened up and poured into a supernova. The link flared. In an instant, I wasn't just Kaelin Vane, the 45-year-old scraphead. I was a part of the atmosphere. I felt the collective consciousness of Ethel Neon, a vast, shimmering sea of silicon-based minds. It was overwhelming. Imagine every secret, every petty grievance, and every silent hope of 5 billion people hitting you at once. Focus on the anchor, Solome's voice echoed in the void. Focus on me. I reached out and found her. She was a pillar of violet light in the middle of the storm. I wrapped my mind around hers and the chaos settled into a hum. Citizens of Ethel Neon, Solome's voice rang out, not from the spire, but inside the minds of every living being on the planet. I felt the shock of the people. They felt the human presence in the broadcast, the jagged, gritty texture of my Terran consciousness. It was like a splash of cold water in a warm bath. You have been told that we are separate, she continued, and I provided the visual memories. I showed them the reactor room 15 years ago, not the sanitized version from the history scrolls, but the raw, bloody truth. I showed them the white-hot agony of the core and the small human hand that reached through the fire to save a princess. I felt the rejection of the older generation, the purebloods who viewed humanity as a plague. But I also felt something else, a flicker of curiosity from the youth. The source code is not a secret to be hoarded by the Council, Solome said, her resolve hardening. It is a symphony of two worlds, the strength of the machine and the heart of the man. I felt the pressure of the broadcast. It was draining us. My biological heart was racing at 120 beats per minute, and the temperature of my neural shunts was climbing toward a critical threshold. The power distribution within the link followed a complex harmonic resonance, which I could see as a shifting equation in my mind. Omega total equals the sum from I equals 1 to n of lambda human, plus lambda crystallis times e to the power of j of theta sync. If the synchronization angle theta sync drifted even a few degrees, our brains would turn to ash. Look at him, Solome urged the people. He is broken, he is scarred, he is human, and he is the only reason I am here to speak to you. In that moment, she opened the final gate of her mind. She showed the people, and me, the depth of her loneliness. She showed the years she spent staring at the stars, wondering where I was. She showed the fear she felt that she was nothing more than a figurehead, a puppet for a dying king. It was the ultimate vulnerability, a queen showing her subjects her scars. I felt the shift in the planetary mood. The anger didn't vanish, but the confusion turned into a heavy, thoughtful silence. The link was working. We were humanizing the abomination. But then the feedback hit. A massive spike of discordant energy slammed into the spire's array. It was a jamming signal, but it wasn't coming from a ship. It was coming from within the spire itself. "Someone's cooking the grid," I shouted, though my voice was just a series of data packets. The link shattered. I was slammed back into my own body with the force of a physical blow. I collapsed onto the floor, my vision swimming with black spots. The sound of the city's heartbeat vanished, replaced by the shrill scream of the spire's alarms. "Sola me!" I scrambled toward her. She was slumped against the crystal array, her skin a dull, flickering gray. The fiber optic lattice beneath her skin was dark. The elders," she gasped, her hand clutching her chest. "They severed the connection." Shammer. I looked at the console. Xylos was gone. The door to the control room was hissed shut, locked from the outside. "That rat bastard," I growled, punching the override with my mechanical fist. The metal sparked, but the door stayed shut. Xylos flipped. "He sold us out." "It's worse than that, Kalen," Solomie said, her voice trembling. She looked out the window. I followed her gaze. The sky above Ethel Neon was no longer violet. It was a bruised, angry crimson. The planetary defense shields were flickering, falling in sections like a dying fire. The Void Drifters, a fleet of black, jagged ships, emerged from the nebula, their engines burning with a cold blue flame. They weren't waiting for the council to vote. They were taking the source code by force. "We're FUBAR," I whispered. "Total and complete FUBAR." I checked my 6. The elevator was rising. I could hear the rhythmic thud of heavy boots. The Obsidian Guard was back, and this time, they weren't bringing phase blades. They were bringing heavy ordnance. Solomie stood up, leaning on the array for support. She looked at me, and despite the dullness of her skin, her eyes were filled with a terrifyingly clear resolve. "They think they've severed the link," she said, "but they only severed the broadcast." She reached out and grabbed my hand. I felt the pulse return, weak, but there. "The lesson, Kalen," she said. "What did you tell me 15 years ago, when the reactor was melting?" I looked at her, the memories of the fire and the ash swirling in my mind. "I told you to stop shaking. I told you that being scared was okay, as long as you didn't let it stop you from moving." "Then let's move," she said. The doors to the apex deck exploded. I didn't have my blaster. I didn't have my armor. I just had a deadweight arm and a princess who was glowing like a dying star. "Check your 6, Sola," I said, stepping in front of her. "Things are about to get really gritty." The first guard stepped through the smoke, his heavy repeater aimed at my chest. I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to, because for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't just fighting to survive. I was fighting for the we, and that made me the most dangerous man in the galaxy. The sound of a heavy repeater is a rhythmic, bone-shaking thud, thud, thud that echoes in your skull long after the trigger is released. I felt the heat of the plasma bolts as they sizzled past my ear, singing the collar of my duster. I dove behind a decorative pillar of star glass, dragging Solomie down with me. "Stay low," I shouted over the roar of the fire. My mechanical arm was whining again, the power levels dropping as it struggled to maintain the rerouted energy from Solomie. I needed to stabilize the draw, or it would explode and take my shoulder with it. "Kalen, I can't reach the core," Solomie cried out. She was pressed against the glass, her hands glowing fitfully. Xylos didn't just jam the broadcast, he injected a logic plague into the spire's subroutines. The whole system is glitching. A logic plague. Great, the digital equivalent of a stroke. "Can you purge it?" I asked, peeking around the pillar. 2 guards were moving in, leapfrogging between cover. They were pros. No shouting, no wasted movement. Just cold, tactical efficiency. "Not from here," she said, her violet eyes wide with a frantic desperation. "I need to be at the physical terminal in the server hub. 2 levels down." 2 levels? I looked at the floor. The elevator was out of the question, and the emergency stairs were crawling with Obsidian Guard. "We're 3,000 meters up, Sola. We don't have wings." "We have the gravity wells," she said, pointing to the venting shafts that ran the length of the spire. "If I can manipulate the local field, we can drop through the vents. But I need you to anchor me." "Anchor you?" Sola, I'm 100 kilos of meat and metal. I'll pull us both into the basement at terminal velocity. Not if you trust me, she said. Trust. That was the word that kept coming up today. The one thing I'd spent 15 years avoiding. Trusting someone meant giving them the power to break you. It meant being vulnerable. And in my experience, vulnerability was just a fancy word for getting killed. But as I looked at the guards closing in, their repeaters glowing with the next volley, I realized I didn't have a choice. I could die alone behind this pillar, or I could risk everything on a girl who was as broken as I was. Fine, I growled, but if we end up as a pancake on the lower decks, I'm never letting you hear the end of it. I grabbed her around the waist, my mechanical arm locking into a vice grip. We ran for the ventilation grate. Hey, scrapheads! I yelled at the guards, firing a few shots from a discarded pistol I'd scavenged from the floor. Catch you on the flip side! We jumped. The sensation of falling is one thing. The sensation of falling through a vertical tunnel filled with high-velocity air and grinding fans is another. Solami screamed, a sound that resonated through the link like a jagged piece of glass. She threw her hands out, her skin erupting in a blinding flare of violet. The gravity shifted. It didn't stop, but it became thick, like falling through syrup. We slowed down, our boots scraping against the metal sides of the vent. Keep it. Together, she gasped. I felt her strain. The logic plague was fighting her, trying to shut down her access to the gravity regs. Her thoughts were a mess of equations and static. F net equals mg minus F levitation minus F drag. She was trying to balance the net force, F net, to zero, but the levitation force, F levitation, was fluctuating wildly. We slammed into a maintenance grate 2 levels down. The metal buckled under our impact, and we tumbled into a dark, cramped room filled with humming server banks. I scrambled to my feet, my head spinning. Sola Mi was on the floor, gasping for air. Her skin was so dim she was almost gray. Sola? I knelt beside her. I'm okay, she whispered. The plague, it's aggressive. It's eating my neural lattice. I looked around. We were in the heart of the Spire's logic center. This was where the brain of Ethel Neon lived. Thousands of data crystals were slotted into the walls, glowing with a soft, steady pulse. And in the center of the room, standing at the master terminal, was Xylos. He didn't look like a traitor. He looked like a man who was doing a very difficult, very necessary job. His purple skin was etched with deep lines of exhaustion. You're too late, Solami, he said, his voice quiet. He didn't even turn around. The purge is at 95%. The source code is being wiped. Wiped? Solami stood up, leaning on me for support. Xylos, why? You've served the throne for 300 years. The throne is a lie. Xylos turned, his galaxy eyes swirling with a dark, bitter energy. I've watched the crystallis people stagnate for centuries, hiding behind their walls of light while the rest of the galaxy burns. We are a dead race, Sola. We just don't know it yet. So you're selling us to the Void Drifters? I asked, my hand moving toward my holster. The Drifters are scavengers, Xylos spat. They don't want the code. They want the power. I'm not selling the planet, Commander. I'm destroying the prize. If there is no source code, the Drifters have no reason to stay. They'll move on to the next system, and Ethel Neon will be left in peace. Peace? Solami's voice was a whip crack. Without the code, the atmosphere processors will fail. The gravity grids will collapse. The planet will become a frozen rock. You're murdering 5 billion people to save them from a war? A quick death is better than the slow decay of a puppet state, Xylos replied. Ethel Neon needs a clean slate, a world without kings, a world without Terran interference. I'd heard this kind of logic before. It's the talk of a man who's lost his way so thoroughly he thinks the darkness is light. Xylos wasn't a villain in his own mind. He was a martyr, and that made him the most dangerous kind of traitor. I can't let you do that, pal, I said, stepping forward. Stay back, Commander, Xylos said, raising a handheld disruptor. One step and I fry the master crystal. The collapse will be instantaneous. I stopped. Through the link, I felt Solami's despair. She had trusted this man. He had been her teacher, her advisor, her friend. And now he was the one holding the knife to her planet's throat. The cost of trust. Sola, I whispered in our shared space. I need you to listen. I'm going to draw his fire. You need to get to the auxiliary terminal and bypass the purge. He'll kill you, Kalen, she replied, her thoughts trembling. Maybe, I said, but being a hero was never about the paycheck, right? I looked at Silos. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you figured out the secret of the universe. But you're missing one thing. And what is that, Taryn? You're a coward, I said, my voice cold. You're so scared of the future that you'd rather burn the world than face it. You're scared of change. You're scared of Sola me. And most of all, you're scared of the fact that a scraphead like me is more of a man than you'll ever be. Xylos' skin flared a deep, angry crimson. His hand tightened on the disruptor. You know nothing of our history, you biological parasite. I know enough, I said. I lunged, not toward Xylos, but toward the master crystal. He fired. The disruptor beam hit my mechanical arm, the energy overloading the servos and sending a feedback loop of agony into my brain. I screamed, but I didn't stop. I used the momentum to slam my fist into the server bank next to him. The crystals shattered. Sparks flew, lighting up the dark room in a strobe of blue and white. Xylos lunged for me, his light form flickering as he tried to phase through my physical shell. But my arm was still overcharged, the energy leaking out in a chaotic field that grounded him. I grabbed him by the throat, my silver fingers digging into his silicon skin. Sola! Now! She didn't hesitate. She dove for the auxiliary terminal, her hands flying across the light keys. Her skin was glowing again, the violet light returning as she found a pocket of clean code. Purge halted, she shouted, reinitializing the planetary shields. Silos struggled in my grip, his face a mask of fury. You've ruined everything. The drifters will burn us all. Let 'em try, I grunted, slamming him against the wall. We've got a better firewall this time. I felt a surge of energy through the link, a triumphant, soaring wave of power. Sola me had done it. The crimson sky outside began to fade back to violet. The planetary shields roared back to life, the atmospheric hum returning to its steady, comforting rhythm. But it wasn't over. A loud metallic clack echoed through the room. I looked down. Xylos had a backup detonator in his hand, a physical one. If I can't wipe the code, he whispered, his eyes dimming, I will take the heart. He pressed the button. The floor beneath the master terminal exploded. I was thrown backward, the force of the blast slamming me into a server rack. My vision went white. The sound of Solami's scream was the last thing I heard before the world dissolved into fire. When I opened my eyes, the room was a ruin. Smoke filled the air, the smell of burning circuits and ozone thick enough to choke on. The master terminal was a crater of molten slag. Sola? I tried to move, but my mechanical arm was pinned under a fallen support beam. My biological leg felt like it was on fire. Sola me. I'm here. I looked toward the auxiliary terminal. She was lying on the floor, her gown torn, her skin flickering like a dying candle. But she was alive. I looked at my pinned arm. I could hear the obsidian guard coming back down the vents. We had seconds. Kalen, your arm, she whispered, her eyes wide with horror. Forget the arm, I said, my voice a ragged growl. Sola, look at me. The link. Is it still there? She closed her eyes, searching the darkness. It's frayed, but I can feel you. Good, and when I said, because I need you to do something for me, something that's going to scare the hell out of you. What? I need you to leave me, I said. The silence that followed was heavier than the support beam on my arm. Sola me stared at me, her violet eyes filling with a fierce, stubborn light. No, she said. Sola, listen to me. The guards are coming. If they catch you here, the planet is lost. You are the code now. You are Ethel Neon. You have to get to the king's bunker. You have to lead. I won't leave you again, Kalen. Not after 15 years. You aren't leaving me, I said, reaching out with my real hand toward her. You're taking me with you, in here. I tapped my temple. The link. We're joined, remember? As long as you're alive, a part of me is alive too. It was the hardest thing I'd ever said. It was the ultimate acceptance of the lesson. I wasn't just acting despite my fear of death. I was acting despite my fear of being forgotten. I was trusting her to carry my soul. Kaelin, go, Sola. That's an order from your consort. She looked at the vents, then back at me. I saw the struggle in her mind, the battle between her heart and her duty. And for a second, I saw the queen she was going to become. She leaned down and pressed her forehead against mine. The link flared one last time, a surge of warmth and grief that nearly broke me. I will find a way back for you, she whispered. I promise on the first light. She stood up, her skin glowing with a newfound cold intensity. She didn't look back. She ran for the emergency exit, her movements fluid and purposeful. I watched her go, a small violet spark in the darkness. The guards dropped from the vents a moment later. They surrounded me, their repeaters aimed at my head. Where is she, Terran? One of them demanded, his voice distorted by his helmet. I looked up at them and gave a bloody, lopsided grin. She's everywhere, pal. You're just too dim to see her. They raised their weapons. I closed my eyes and reached out through the frayed ends of the link. I felt her. She was moving fast, reaching the bunker, rallying the loyalists. I felt her strength, her courage, and her love. And for the first time in 45 years, I wasn't afraid of the dark. Check your 6, I whispered to the empty room. The first bolt hit me, and then there was only light. The sensation of consciousness returning was not a gentle awakening. It was the sharp, jagged edge of a neuroshave scraping against the inside of my skull. I tried to gasp, but my lungs felt like they were filled with cold mercury. There was no air here, only the pressurized, sterile hum of a void drifter containment cell. I was suspended in a cradle of magnetic filaments, my body stripped of the tattered duster and the tactical gear. My mechanical arm hung limp, its power cells drained to near zero, the silver fingers twitching with a rhythmic, purposeless spasm. My biological leg was a throbbing pillar of fire, every nerve ending screaming a protest against the makeshift cauterization the obsidian guard had performed before tossing me into this hole. I tried to reach for the link. It was like reaching for a radio station in a hurricane. I could feel the static, the white noise of a billion interrupted data packets, but Solomie was gone. The golden thread that had tied our souls together was frayed, drifting in the vacuum. For the first time in 15 years, I felt the true weight of my 45 years. I wasn't a protector. I wasn't a consort. I was just a dying man in a tin can, orbiting a planet that was about to be stripped for parts. Check your 6, Kaelin, I thought. But there was no 6 to check. There was only the dark. The wall of the cell dissolved into a shimmering field of black particles. General Vaxus stepped through, his mottled gray skin looking even more corpse-like under the harsh, artificial lights of the Drifter flagship. He wasn't alone. Beside him floated a being that made my cybernetic eye whirl in its socket, trying to find a focal point. It was a void drifter, a creature of shifting, amorphous smoke, held together by a translucent environmental suit. It didn't have a face, only a single glowing aperture that pulsed with a cold blue light. So, the ghost finally wakes, Vaxus said. His voice was a distorted rasp, filtered through a breather mask. I've spent the last 3 hours watching your vital signs fluctuate, Terran. Most men would have flatlined after the discharge you took in the server room. I'm too stubborn to die, Vaxus, I wheezed, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. It's a Terran trait. You wouldn't understand. The drifter took a step forward, the floor of the cell vibrating with a low-frequency hum. Its aperture pulsed, and a voice entered my mind, not like Solomie's warmth, but like a razor blade slicing through paper. The source code, it said. The human vessel contains the encryption keys. The logic plague was insufficient. We require the biological signature. Vaxus leaned in, his eyes narrowed with a predatory gleam. You heard the thing, Kaelin. Give us the keys, and I might make your execution quick. I might even let the girl live as a servant in the new order. I looked at him, and despite the agony, I started to laugh. It was a dry, rattling sound. You really don't get it, do you? You've sold your soul to a pack of interstellar scavengers, and you think you're still in charge. You're just a glorified doorman, Vaxus. The general's hand blurred. He struck me across the face, the blow rattling my teeth and sending a spray of blood onto the floor. I didn't flinch. I'd been hit by better men than him. The drifter raised a limb, a long, needle-like appendage that glowed with a sickly green light. We will take the keys from the marrow, it stated. The process will be exhaustive. I felt the needle pierce the soft tissue of my neck, seeking the neural port. Wait, I thought, reaching for the link with everything I had left. Sola, if you're there, stay away. But the link wasn't empty. Far away, through the noise in the distance, I felt a ripple of defiance. It wasn't a word. It was an image of a star burning in the dark. She was still out there. She was leading. The drifter began the extraction. It wasn't physical pain. Not exactly. It was the sensation of my memories being unzipped, my history being deleted file by file. I saw my mother's face on the Terran colonies, then it flickered and vanished. I saw my first day at the academy, the smell of the parade grounds, the weight of the rifle. Deleted. I saw the faces of the brothers I'd lost in the Great Desync. Deleted. The extraction followed a catastrophic decay curve, which appeared in my mind as a bleeding red equation. E decay equals limit as t approaches infinity sum from n equals 1 to infinity of alpha to the power of n over beta to the power of t log of delta memory. The variable delta memory was approaching 0. I was being hollowed out. Is this it? I thought as the darkness pressed in. Is this how the story ends? A forgotten man in a forgotten cell? I felt fear, not the fear of a soldier in a trench, but a deep existential terror. If my memories were gone, who was I? If the I vanished, was there anything left to love Solomie? I wanted to give in. I wanted to tell them the keys, to give them the encryption just to make the deletion stop. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Kalen. Solomie's voice. It wasn't a memory. It was a live signal. I realized then that the drifter's needle had opened a channel. By trying to steal my data, they had accidentally provided the very bridge I needed to bypass their jamming. I stopped fighting the deletion. Instead, I channeled the fear into the link. I fed the drifter my terror, my pain, my sense of loss. I used the energy of their own extraction to jumpstart my mechanical arm. My servos screamed as I rerouted the last 5% of my emergency power into the hand actuators. I reached out, my silver fingers catching the drifter's needle arm. The machine mind met the man mind. Check your six, spook, I whispered in the silence of the neural space. I didn't try to save my memories. I used them as ammunition. I took every trauma, every nightmare, and every moment of searing pain I'd ever experienced and shoved them down the drifter's extraction line. I gave them the burning reactor. I gave them the exile. I gave them the taste of copper and the smell of death. The drifter recoiled, its blue aperture flashing a panicked, strobe-like white. It wasn't used to chaos. It was a creature of logic and cold efficiency, and I was giving it raw, unadulterated human misery. The containment field flickered. Vaxus looked confused, reaching for his sidearm. "What are you doing? Stop him!" But the drifter was locked in a feedback loop. It couldn't let go, and it couldn't process the input. I looked at Vaxus, my biological eye clouded with blood, my mechanical eye spinning with a manic energy. "You want the keys?" I growled. "Here's the first one." I squeezed. The drifter's arm shattered like brittle glass. The resulting energy discharge threw me back against the wall and sent Vaxus flying into the corridor. The cell door didn't just open, it disintegrated as the ship's internal gravity grid suffered a catastrophic localized failure. I fell to the floor, gasping for air that was rapidly venting into the hall. I was broken. My memory core was a ruin. I couldn't remember my own middle name. I couldn't remember the color of my first ship, but I remembered her, Solomie. The link was humming now, a low, steady vibration that felt like a heartbeat. She was close. I could feel the thrum of her engines, the pride of her pilots, and the fierce burning light of her soul. We're Oscar Mike, Sola, I thought, a small, bloody smile touching my lips. I crawled toward the doorway, dragging my useless mechanical arm behind me. My leg was numb now, which was a blessing. I found a discarded phase blade in the debris. I didn't have the strength to stand, but I had enough to kill. You think you can just walk out of here? Vaxus stood in the hallway, his face scorched, his uniform in tatters. He leveled his heavy blaster at my head. You're a ghost, Vane. You're already dead. Maybe, I said, leaning my back against the cold, vibrating hull of the ship. But I've always been a ghost. You're just the one who's about to join the club. From outside the hull, the sound of 1,000 thunderclaps echoed through the ship. The flagship groaned as its shields were hammered by a coordinated strike. The rescue had arrived. I looked at Vaxus and didn't feel hatred. I felt pity. He was so scared of the unknown that he'd tried to kill the future. He didn't understand that fear was just fuel. Do it, I said, my voice quiet. Pull the trigger. See if it stops the stars from coming down. Vaxus hesitated. In that moment of doubt, the hull of the flagship buckled. A boarding pod, shaped like a golden needle, punched through the bulkhead 5 meters away. The air hissed as the pressure equalized. A figure stepped out of the smoke, clad in a gown of white-violet fire and carrying a scepter of pure energy. Solomie. She didn't look at Vaxus. She didn't look at the ship. She looked at me. Kaelin, she whispered. I looked up at her, my vision failing, my mind a blank slate of erased data. I don't know who I am, I said, the words barely audible. I don't know where I came from. She knelt beside me, her light filling the dark hallway, her warmth chasing away the chill of the void. It doesn't matter, she said, her hands cupping my face. I know who you are, and I have enough memories for both of us. She turned her gaze toward Vaxus. The general fired. The plasma bolt aimed straight at her heart. Solomie didn't move. She simply raised a hand, and the bolt slowed, stopped, and dissolved into harmless sparks. The strength of the man and the heart of the machine, she said, her voice echoing with the power of the ethel core. She pointed her scepter. Vaxus didn't have time to scream before he was encased in a pillar of stasis light, frozen in his moment of cowardice. Solomie turned back to me, her eyes overflowing with a love that felt like the birth of a galaxy. Let's go home, Kaelin. I leaned my head against her shoulder, my eyes closing as the darkness finally took me. But this time, it wasn't the dark of the void. It was the dark before the dawn. I awoke to the sound of humming, not the mechanical, jagged hum of the drifter flagship, but a deep, melodic vibration that felt like it was coming from the marrow of my bones. I was lying in a pool of liquid light, similar to the vats in the inner sanctum, but smaller, more intimate. The ethel neon Royal Infirmary. I looked down at my body. My mechanical arm had been replaced, not with a scrapyard special, but with a sleek, translucent limb made of the same living silicon as Solomie's skin. It felt light, almost weightless, and as I flexed my fingers, I felt a stream of data flowing through them, as natural as blood. My biological leg was healed, the scars smoothed over by regenerative light cells. But the silence in my head was the most striking thing. The memory loss was real. Large sections of my life were simply gone, white spaces where people, places, and events should have been. I felt a surge of panic. If I didn't remember the past, how could I exist in the present? A warm hand touched mine. Focus on the pulse, Kaelin, a voice said. Solomie was sitting by the pool. She looked exhausted, her bioluminescence a soft, steady violet. She had traded her royal gown for a simple tunic of woven light. I'm missing thing, I said, my voice clear and strong. Sola, I can't remember the name of my first commander. I can't remember what Earth looks like from a distance. Those are just data points, Kaelin, she said, her fingers intertwining with my new ones. They don't make the man. You chose to give them up to save the core. That choice is who you are. Is it? I sat up, the liquid light falling away from my chest. I feel like a ghost in a new suit of clothes. Then be a ghost who chooses to haunt the right places, she replied with a small smile. She stood up and helped me out of the pool. As my feet hit the floor, I felt the connection again. The link. It was no longer a frayed wire. It was a broad, stable bridge. I could feel her thoughts, her fears for the coming war, and her unwavering pride in me. The drifters? I asked, my tactical mind reasserting itself. Driven back for now, she said, leading me toward the window. But they're regrouping at the edge of the nebula. The council is in chaos. Half of them want to surrender, and the other half want to use the source code to trigger a planetary self-destruct. They'd rather die than change, I said, looking out at the city. Ethel Neon was a hive of activity. Ships were being fueled, shields were being reinforced, and the streets were filled with people who looked neither confused nor angry. They looked determined. The broadcast had worked. My vulnerability in Solomise had given them something to fight for. "We have to go to the High Council," Solomise said. "They're meeting in an hour to vote on the succession. My father, he isn't going to make it through the night." "Then it's time to stop playing defense," I said. We moved through the palace, but this time, the atmosphere was different. The Aegis guards didn't just avert their eyes, they stood at attention, their energy pikes crossing in a salute as we passed. The servants bowed, not out of fear, but out of a genuine, flickering respect. The council chamber was a cauldron of noise. The purebloods were shouting about the defilement of the royal line, while the younger nobles were arguing for a total mobilization. King Vorus sat on his throne, his skin almost charcoal gray, his eyes clouded with the final stages of the transition. Solomise stepped into the center of the room, and the silence that followed was deafening. "The time for debate is over," she said, her voice projecting with a resonance that made the crystal walls vibrate. "The void drifters are at our door. The logic plague is still lurking in our grid, and my father is passing the mantle." The horned noble who had insulted me before stood up, his skin a defiant, angry red. "We will not accept a successor who is bound to a Terran. You have compromised the purity of the Crystallis bloodline. Solomise, you are a traitor to your heritage." I stepped forward, my new arm shimmering in the council's light. "You talk a lot about purity, pal," I said, my voice carrying that same melodic hum as Solomise. "But I didn't see you in the server room when the bombs were going off. I didn't see you in the shadow cage when the drifters were peeling back our minds." "You are a contaminant," the noble shouted. "I'm a solution," I countered. "And if you're so worried about the bloodline, maybe you should look at what it's produced. A dying king and a room full of cowards who are scared of a little change." I looked at King Vorus. He met my gaze, and for a second, the cloudiness in his eyes cleared. He saw the link. He saw the way Solomise and I stood together, not as protector and princess, but as two halves of a single powerful entity. "Enough," the king whispered. The word was small, but it carried the weight of 300 years of rule. The chamber went still. "Solomise," the king said, his voice a dry rasp. "Do you truly believe that this union is the future of Ethel Neon?" "I do, father," she said, her voice steady, "because it is the only way we survive. Not as a stagnant race of light, but as a living, evolving society that isn't afraid to bridge the gap between worlds." The king turned his gaze to me. "And you, Terran, what do you offer my daughter? You have no lands, no titles, and now you say you have no memories." I looked at Solomise, and I felt the truth of the lesson we had both learned. "I offer her my courage, your majesty. Not because I'm not afraid. I'm terrified of what comes next. I'm scared of the war, and I'm scared of the blank spaces in my head. But I'm standing here anyway, and I'll keep standing here until the stars go out." The king nodded slowly. He reached out and touched the armrest of his throne. A final, brilliant pulse of violet light erupted from his hand, flowing into the diamond-carved seat. "Then the vote is unnecessary," Vorus said, his skin beginning to dissolve into pure energy. "The source code has already made its choice." The throne didn't just sit there, it began to grow, its crystalline structure expanding and shifting until it formed two seats instead of one. They were intertwined, the lattice work of one flowing seamlessly into the other. A collective gasp went through the room. The co-processor throne, Xylos had once called it in derision, but here it was, a physical manifestation of the union. The king's physical form vanished, leaving only a shimmering cloud of light that drifted upward toward the core. The transition was complete. Solomise looked at the double throne, then at me. Her thoughts were a mixture of grief for her father and a staggering, terrifying joy. "Are you ready for this shock, Kaelin?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "I've survived everything else," I said, taking her hand. "I think I can handle a seat with a view." We walked to the throne together. As we sat, the link exploded with power. I didn't just feel Solami, I felt the entire planet. I felt the pulse of the defense grid, the flow of the energy conduits, and the collective spirit of 5 billion people. We weren't just rulers. We were the planetary consciousness. I looked out at the council. The horned noble had slumped back into his seat, his skin a muted, defeated amber. The younger nobles were standing, their skin pulsing with a rhythmic, respectful violet. Citizens of Ethel Neon! Solami's voice rang out across the planet, broadcast through our joint neural signature. The age of isolation is over. The age of unity has begun. I felt the response, a massive global surge of hope. But as the celebration began, I felt a shadow at the edge of the system. The Void Drifter fleet was moving. They had seen the transition. They knew the source code was fully activated, and they were coming for it. Check your 6, Sola, I thought. I've got it, Kalen, she replied. We stood up from the throne, our hands still entwined, our skin glowing with a unified light. The war was coming, and we were the front line. I still couldn't remember my first ship's name. I still didn't know what my mother's favorite flower was. But as I looked at Solami, I realized it didn't matter. I had everything I needed right here. I was Kalen Vax. I was a husband, a consort, and a commander. I was a man who had faced the void and come back with a light that could outshine the stars. The transformation was painful, and the cost was high. But as the first drifter ships entered the atmosphere, their black hulls silhouetted against our violet sky, I knew one thing for certain. We weren't ghosts anymore. We were the dawn. Time to bug out? I asked, a familiar, gritty grin returning to my face as the sirens began to wail. Not a chance, Commander, Solami replied, her energy scepter igniting with a roar of violet flame. We're just getting started. The battle for Ethel Neon was about to begin, and for the first time in history, the planet was ready. Not because we were fearless, but because we were brave. And that was a shock the universe wasn't prepared for. The atmosphere of Ethel Neon was no longer the serene violet of a peaceful evening. It had become a bruised, electric crimson, scorched by the atmospheric friction of 10,000 jagged black ships. The Void Drifter fleet had entered the inner orbit, descending like a cloud of locusts onto a field of glass. From my position on the coprocessor throne, the planet didn't feel like a world anymore. It felt like a body under assault. I could feel every impact of their plasma lances against our orbital shields as a sharp, stinging sensation along the fiber optic nerves of my new arm. Solami sat beside me, her hand gripping mine so hard I could feel the microscopic vibrations of her own fear. We were linked, deeper than we had ever been. There were no secrets left between us, only the raw, unfiltered data of our shared existence. I could feel her grief for her father, a heavy gray stone in the center of her chest, and I could feel her terror that I would disappear again into the blank spaces of my own mind. Check your 6, Sola, I whispered through the neural link. The flank at Sector 7 is buckling. They're using phase oscillators to vibrate the shield out of alignment. I see them, Kalen, she replied, her voice echoing in my skull with a resonant, metallic clarity. I'm rerouting the power from the secondary conduits, but it's not enough. We're fighting a war of attrition, and they have more ships than we have light. The situation room below us was a chaotic mess of frantic technicians and shouting nobles. But up here, in the apex, there was a strange, terrifying silence. We were the only ones who knew the truth. The planetary shields were at 40% and falling. The logic plague that Xylos had unleashed was still eating at the foundation of our defense grid, creating blind spots that the drifters were exploiting with predatory precision. We need to perform a total sync, Solami said. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, a phantom sensation, since my spine was now mostly a conduit for the planetary core. A total sync meant removing the final firewalls between our consciousness and the source code. It meant surrendering the last of our individual identities to become a pure, singular expression of the Ethel Neon will. For Solami, it was a risk she was born to take. For a Terran scraphead like me, with a memory core already full of holes, it was a gamble that I might never come back. If we do this, I might lose the rest of it, Sola, I said, my voice sounding ragged even in our shared headspace. I might not remember your name when the smoke clears. I might just be another ghost in the machine. She turned to look at me, her violet skin glowing with a fierce, desperate intensity. Then we will make new memories, Kalen. But if we don't do this, there won't be anyone left to remember anything. I looked out at the sky. A massive drifter flagship, a needle of obsidian 3 kilometers long, was beginning its final descent toward the palace. It was glowing with a sickly blue light, preparing to fire its main harvester beam. If that beam hit the core, the planet would be shattered into a billion pieces of silicon dust. Courage isn't the absence of fear, I thought, repeating the mantra that had become my only anchor. It's acting despite the fact that you're shaking so hard your gears are grinding. Fine, I said. Let's cook the grid. We closed our eyes and reached for the final gate. The total sync was not a gradual merge. It was an explosion. It felt like my mind was being pulled through a needle eye and then expanded to cover the entire solar system. The pain was transcendent, a white-hot agony that stripped away the labels of human and alien, man and woman, past and future. I saw the math of the universe, the beautiful, terrifying equations that governed the stars. The synchronization resonance reached a level of pure harmonic perfection. Phi total equals limit as delta approaches zero integral of nabla. Cross psi union dot dA plus sum from ke equals 1 to infinity lambda. K over the square root of 1 minus beta squared. The entire planet of ethyl neon became our physical shell. I felt the mountains as my bones, the neon rivers as my blood, and the billions of citizens as the flickering thoughts in the back of my brain. I saw the void drifters for what they truly were, not just scavengers, but parasites of entropy, fleeing their own dying galaxies by devouring the light of others. They're hungry, Sola, I whispered, though I no longer had a mouth. Then let's feed them something they can't swallow, she replied. We didn't fire weapons. We didn't use plasma or kinetics. Instead, we used the link to invert the planetary shield. We turned the entire atmosphere of ethyl neon into a massive resonant tuning fork. We broadcast the frequency of the source code, the sound of life, growth, and the stubborn persistence of two different species choosing to love each other, outward into the vacuum. The effect on the drifter fleet was instantaneous. Their ships, built on the principles of silence and void, couldn't handle the harmonic pressure of our unified signal. I watched through 10,000 orbital sensors as their obsidian hulls began to vibrate, then crack and finally shatter into harmless dust. It wasn't an explosion. It was a dissolution. We were singing them out of existence. The flagship tried to fire its harvester beam, but the frequency caught the beam mid-air, refracting it back into the ship's own core. The needle of obsidian turned into a pillar of white light before vanishing into the dark. The crimson sky began to clear. The electric red was replaced by a soft pulsing violet as the atmosphere processors began to scrub the ozone and ash from the air. The war was over, but the price was being called. I felt the link begin to retract, the massive planetary consciousness shrinking back into the confines of two small, fragile bodies. I felt the blank spaces in my head expanding, devouring the few memories I had left. I forgot the smell of the Terran rain. I forgot the sound of the transport shuttles at the fringe colonies. I forgot the face of the man who had taught me how to fix a faulty servo. Kalen! Solome's voice was a frantic anchor in the receding tide. Stay with me. I tried to hold on, but I was slipping. The machine was winning. The silence was coming for me, cold and absolute. I felt like a ghost drifting away from its own grave. Then I felt a choice. I could fight the loss, clinging to the jagged pieces of a past that was already gone, or I could let go and trust the woman holding my hand. I could choose to be a man defined by what he had lost, or a man defined by what he was willing to become. I let go. I let the memories of Earth in the academy and the exile fall away into the void. I let the ghosts of the old Kalen vein drift into the dark, and in that empty space, I reached for the only thing that was real, the pulse of Solome's heart against mine. The link settled into a quiet, steady hum. I opened my eyes. The council chamber was silent. The nobles were staring at us in awe, their skin glowing with a soft, reverent violet. Solome was slumped in her half of the throne, her breathing shallow, her eyes filled with a terrifyingly deep hope. Kalen, she whispered, her voice barely a thread. I looked at my translucent arm, then at her beautiful, weary face. I didn't know the name of the planet I was born on. I didn't know how I had gotten these scars. But as I looked into her eyes, I knew exactly who I was. I'm here, Sola, I said, my voice steady. I'm right here. Behind us, the head technician, Silos, who had been brought back in chains to witness the end of his betrayal, fell to his knees. His skin was a dull, ashen gray. It's impossible, he muttered. The feedback. No biological mind can survive that level of integration. You should be a vegetable, a hollow shell. I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt a profound sense of pity for the man who thought math was the only truth in the universe. You forgot one variable, Xylos, I said, leaning back into the throne. The machine only takes what you try to hide. If you give it everything, it doesn't have anything left to steal. The war was won, the threat was gone, and the planet of Ethel Neon was safe. But as I sat there, holding the hand of the woman I loved in a world I barely remembered, I realized that the real work was just beginning. We had shocked the universe once. Now we had to show it how to live. 1 year had passed since the day the sky turned violet again. Ethel Neon was no longer the isolated crystalline fortress it had been for 1,000 years. The gates of the celestial capital were open to the Terran refugees from the fringe, and the first hybrid research stations were being built in the neon canyons below the apex. It wasn't a perfect peace. There were still protests in the squares and whispers of dissent among the old guard. It was a living, breathing progress. I stood in the palace gardens, the same place where Solami had first declaring her intention to marry a scrap head commander. The silver trees were in full bloom, their metallic leaves humming a song of reconciliation. I was 46 years old now, though time felt different when your heartbeat was synced to a planetary core. My new arm was a marvel of engineering, a seamless blend of Terran kinetics and crystallis light tech. It didn't just feel like a limb, it felt like an extension of my soul. I could feel the temperature of the air, the vibration of the humming trees, and the distant happy pulse of the city through the silver fingertips. Solami walked toward me, her presence a warm, violet glow in the twilight. She wasn't wearing a royal gown today. She wore a simple pilot's jumpsuit, her long, crystalline hair tied back in a practical knot. She looked like a woman who was ready to build a world, not just rule one. The first transport from the Sol system just docked, she said, leaning against the railing beside me. There are 3,000 families on board. Doctors, engineers, farmers. They're calling it the New Dawn Colony. 3,000, I mused, the number feeling heavy and hopeful. That's a lot of mouths to feed, Sola. We have plenty of light, Kaylin, she replied, smiling. And we have plenty of room. She looked at me, her gaze lingering on the scars on my cheek that the light cells couldn't quite erase. How are the blank spaces today? I closed my eyes for a moment, searching the archives of my mind. Still there. I still can't tell you the name of my first pet or what my favorite song was when I was 20. The data's gone, Sola. Permanently deleted. And does it hurt? I thought about it. Truly thought about it. For months after the war, I had felt like a man walking through a fog, constantly reaching for ghosts that weren't there. I had mourned the loss of my past as if it were a dead friend. But slowly, the mourning had turned into something else, a realization. No, I said, opening my eyes to look at the vibrant, glowing city below. It doesn't hurt anymore. I spent 45 years carrying around a bag full of ghosts, Sola. I was defined by my exile, my failures, and my anger. I use those memories as armor, but armor is just a fancy word for a cage. When the drifters took my past, they accidentally gave me my future. I reached out and plucked a silver leaf from a nearby branch. I watched the light dance across its surface, marveling at the simple beauty of the moment. I looked back on the journey that had brought me here. I remembered the cold, bitter man who had stepped off that transport shuttle a year ago, ready to kill for a paycheck and die for nothing. I remembered the fear I had felt when Solami first touched my cheek, the terror of being seen and the desperate need to stay hidden behind my walls of chrome and hooch. I had thought that being a soldier meant being unbreakable. I had thought that courage was about being the strongest man in the room. I was wrong. Courage was the moment I jumped into the cooling vats. Courage was the moment I let Solomie see my scars. Courage was the decision to stay in the link when I knew it would cost me my history. I had to lose everything I thought I was to find out who I could be. I had to stop being a ghost of the past to become a guardian of the future. Humanity isn't about where you came from or the data stored in your gray matter. It's about the choices you make when the lights go out. It's about the stubborn, beautiful capacity to act despite the fear, to love despite the differences, and to build something new out of the ashes of the old. I am a man with no history, but I am a man with a purpose. And in the end, that is enough. Solomie took the silver leaf from my hand and tucked it into her pocket. The council is waiting for us, Consort Vax. They want to discuss the new education protocols for the hybrid children. Let them wait another 5 minutes, I said, pulling her into my arms. She laughed, the sound echoing through the humming trees. You're getting a real bad habit of being late for official business, Commander. It's a Terran trait, I whispered, kissing her forehead. You should get used to it. We stood there for a long time, watching the violet sun sink below the horizon, replaced by the warm, steady glow of a city that was no longer afraid of the dark. We were a mess of metal and light, ghosts and queens, humans and aliens. We were a shock to the system, a bridge between worlds, and a testament to the power of a single, brave choice. And as I held her, I realized that I didn't need a memory core to tell me I was home. I looked at the silver trees, then at the sky, and then I found myself wondering something I never would have asked a year ago. I spent 45 years building armor around my heart, thinking that my scars were my only identity, and that my past was the only thing that made me real. I was so afraid of losing my ghost that I almost missed the chance to live. I wonder, if you had to stand in the fire and let go of everything you thought made you, you, every old grudge, every haunting memory, every piece of armor you've built to stay safe, just to become the person the world needs you to be right now, would you have the courage to jump? I tightened my grip on Solomie's hand, feeling the steady, rhythmic pulse of our shared life. It was time to go back inside. We had a lot of shocks left to give the universe. I leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her cheek, my new arm shimmering with a soft violet light as I guided her toward the palace doors. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were shining.